Rachel Lee operated her own little psychic shop in Oregon. As it turns out, you can make a decent living by looking into crystal balls and telling people about their fortunes. While she wasn't exactly living in the lap of luxury, Lee and her family were living comfortably in the city of Canby off the back of her shop's earnings. But living well wasn't good enough for Lee as the years went on. The middle-class psychic had her sights set on greener pastures, it seems, and that's what prompted her to go from fortune-telling to fortune-stealing without even flinching. Lee found the perfect target for the scam she was concocting when Ralph Raines Jr. waltzed into her shop one day. Raines was the latest in a line of wealthy Oregon tree farmers. He and his family operated a timber empire for generations, ever since his father planted the first tree on their farm many years ago. What was once a modest family business had since multiplied into a sprawling 1,200-acre farm worth millions of dollars. In fact, some of the more mature trees on the Raines property are worth up to $1,000 each. It was Ralph Jr.'s turn to take the reins of the family farm. But there was just one problem. He was a lonely old bachelor and had been for most of his 57 years of life. If Ralph never found love, the family business would die with him. That was something Ralph thought long and hard about as he spent his days looking after his dying dad at their Gaston estate. Estate may be giving too much credit to what was ultimately described as a dilapidated house in the rural Portland suburb. Even though the Raines family had money to spare thanks to the lucrative timber business, they weren't the kind of people to flaunt their wealth to the rest of the world. They were historically reserved in their spending, always careful not to let their massive fortune go to waste on luxury cars or showy mansions. But it seemed almost inevitable that Ralph was destined to take a different path. Ralph Sr. had always been hard on his son, and while Ralph Jr. wasn't going to leave his sick father to wither away by his lonesome, serving as his old man's caretaker wasn't the fulfilling existence he was looking for either. He lacked meaningful human connections, which he ultimately craved far more than money. Having always held a particular interest in all things paranormal, Ralph spent a lot of his free time reveling in the world of the occult. Ralph's hobby frequently took him to the various psychic shops in the area. In 2004, he stopped by a shop owned by none other than, you guessed it, Rachel Lee. During his initial visit, the two formed an instant bond. As someone who desperately sought some companionship in his life, Ralph was immediately drawn to Lee and thought he had found a true friend. However, Rachel saw an opportunity to pounce on a lonely man's vulnerability. Ralph constantly returned to Lee's shop for the next couple of years. He believed he was nurturing a beautiful friendship with the woman. He began revealing intimate details about his life, sharing secrets he'd never uttered to a living soul before. The pair became so close that Ralph started not only sharing his emotions, but also his money. He wasn't shy about using his abundant wealth for the benefit of his new friend. On Valentine's Day of 2006, he dipped into his bank account to buy Lee $1 million mansion in Portland's West Hills. The fortune teller had talked Ralph into investing in real estate in the first place, and now she had a beautiful new home to call her own. Lee did her absolute best to maintain the illusion that she and Ralph were friends. In reality, she was scheming to take the millionaire tree farmer for every cent he had. The fancy mansion was just the beginning. After Ralph confided in her about looking after his father on his deathbed, Lee made up a little backstory of her own. She claimed to be a widow who'd helped her late husband with the bookkeeping for his auto repair shop before his death. Of course, this was a lie, but it made Ralph feel like Lee was someone who understood what he was going through. It also gave him the confidence to let her work in his family's business. She also got him to employ her longtime boyfriend, Blancy Lee, who started doing odd jobs around the Raines Gaston home, while Rachel Lee took over as Ralph Sr.'s full-time caretaker. Lee had now planted herself within the Raines estate, bringing her that much closer to getting her hands on Ralph's money. He didn't suspect his new best pal's devious plot even for a second, which was why he eventually gave Lee power of attorney, also known as full control over the family's financial affairs. Lee's plan was all coming together. She helped herself to some of Ralph's cash, even using his financial means to expand her own business. She opened up additional psychic shops in Bend, Scappoose, and Portland. Ralph didn't comprehend the fact that Lee was literally stealing money out from under his nose. He was just happy to have someone in his life besides his sick old dad. The next phase of Lee's plan came to fruition in 2007 when the psychic recruited her teenage daughter to participate in the ruse. 17-year-old Portia Lee was brought into the fold to portray a character entirely of her mother's design. Outfitted in a blonde wig and plenty of makeup, Portia pretended to be a young British lass named Mary Marks. Fun fact, the name Marks belonged to Rachel Lee's biological mother. Ralph had just flown back to Oregon after attending a tree farm convention when he met Miss Mark for the first time. While he was waiting for Rachel to pick him up at the airport, Portia walked up to the bench he was sitting at and asked him if his name was Ralph. Although he was understandably confused, Portia went on to explain that she had always been gifted with psychic abilities. She told Ralph his name, birthday, and tons of other extremely personal information that no stranger would have known. Who was this mystery woman who already knew so much about him? Rachel spoon-fed Portia everything she knew about Ralph. Ralph, being the paranormal nut he was, believed every word she said. The two made plans to meet again, and the Lee family had successfully planted yet another seed of deception. Portia wiggled her way into Ralph's life much like her mother did before. To keep the charade alive, the two women pretended not to know each other. Behind closed doors, they were plotting the next step of the master plan. That next step involved convincing Ralph to marry Portia, who was a whole 40 years younger than him. She claimed she needed her green card to avoid deportation, and Ralph agreed to elope with her. Ralph's bookkeeper, aka Rachel Lee, made the official arrangements, making sure the marriage papers were believable enough to get Ralph to sign them without them being legally binding documents. Ralph believed he was married to the woman he knew as Mary Marks. In actuality, his supposed wife was secretly his close confidant's daughter, and the two were very close to taking his multi-million-dollar fortune right out from under him. In November of 2010, Ralph gave the house in West Hills to his fake wife. It wasn't long before Portia opened up the bank account where she'd hide the cash they were stealing. The mother-daughter team ran into a bit of a problem when Portia became pregnant with an uninvolved man's child. To cover it up, they came up with yet another lie. They planned to trick Ralph into agreeing to let Portia bear his child. Ralph was under the impression that his wife was going to become pregnant through in vitro fertilization. Once she gave birth, he'd signed the keys to the Rains Tree Farm Kingdom over to his new heir. Portia named the baby Giorgio Armani and told Ralph he was the child's father. Rachel then started looking after Giorgio, who was her grandson, at the mansion in West Hills. The Lees knew no bounds when manipulating this lonely man, and the lying wasn't done yet either. Giorgio was eventually given back to his real father, at which point Portia needed to find a stand-in baby to keep Ralph from catching on to their lies. She borrowed her sister's kid, an unknowing accomplice in an increasingly complicated scam. In 2012, Portia pretended to become pregnant with Ralph's second child, a daughter named Gloria Jean. As far as Ralph was concerned, he'd gotten everything he'd ever wanted. The years he spent all alone were in the rear-view mirror now. He had a pregnant wife, a close friend and confidant, and perhaps most importantly, someone to pass along his fortune to. But it wasn't his son who took ownership of his precious inheritance. It was the two women who'd been lying to him for years and were about to break his heart with the cold, hard truth. As 2012 was coming to a close, Rachel Lee was finalizing the liquidation of all of the assets and properties belonging to the Rains family and their business. She sold every last acre of the Rains tree farm and told Ralph that he was dirt broke. Before Ralph even knew what hit him, Portia and Rachel were on their way to lavish vacations in Vegas and Beverly Hills with his money in their pockets. They went on insane shopping sprees with the money they'd slowly and meticulously stolen. Rachel and Blancy went out and bought a pair of luxury cars for themselves. Those fancy cars would prove to be the scammers' undoing. A detective noticed them parked in their Canby driveway and thought it odd that a supposedly middle-class psychic would have the disposable income to splurge on such high-priced luxuries. After doing a little more digging into the Lee family and their association with Ralph Rains Jr., investigators began to piece together details about the long-running fraud that had cost the tree farmer his very livelihood. Thankfully, investigators stepped in when they did. By this point, Ralph was still blissfully unaware of what was going on. He took Rachel at her word when she said she had to sell his farm to cover his inheritance tax. One final lie to put the finishing touches on the 10-year-old scam. Police executed a raid on one of Lee's psychic shops. They found mounds of evidence that incriminated the con artist and her family. Just as the scammers were planning their grand escape, they were arrested on May 8th of 2014. Rachel, Portia, and Blancy Lee were charged with money laundering and other financial crimes that sent them directly to prison. As the fraudsters were spending their days behind bars, Ralph was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. By all accounts, he tried to keep a positive spin on things. He said he cherishes the good memories with Rachel and Portia, and he even desired to remain a part of his fake son's life. Even though the serial liars had taken his $15 million fortune and turned it into just $200,000 in the blink of an eye, Ralph Rains still didn't view the Lees as his enemies. He went as far as to write a letter to the scammers' prosecutors insisting that he was not a victim in the situation. If getting lied to every single day for 10 years and then swindled out of millions and millions of dollars doesn't make you a victim, then surely nothing would. Click here to watch one of these next videos. And let us know in the comments if you would rather inherit $15 million or make $15 million on your own.